When you hear Knights Templar, you probably picture crusaders, right? Swords, shields, white mantles with the red cross. But what if I told you their real story, the one that truly changed the world, wasn't about swords at all, but about finance? Yeah. We're going to talk about how a handful of poor knights built Europe's very first international bank on a single, powerful idea, and then how it was all torn down in a single day. Okay, let's get into it. And that quote, that's the fundamental rule of the game we're about to unpack. It's what drove kings, it built empires, and honestly, it's why the Templar story from 900 years ago feels like it could have been ripped right out of today's headlines. This isn't just history class, it's a blueprint for power. To really get to the heart of this, we have to ask a super basic question. What even is money? And the answer the Templars came up with? Well, it was so brilliant, so revolutionary, it completely changed the course of finance. And I'm willing to bet it'll change the way you think about the cash in your pocket. So how on earth did a military order of monks become a financial behemoth? You know, like all the greatest innovations, it didn't start with a grand plan for power. It started with a huge, incredibly dangerous problem that desperately needed a solution.
That's it. That's how it all began. Just 9 guys. See, after the First Crusade, traveling to the Holy Land was a nightmare. Pilgrims would carry their entire life savings with them, and they were basically sitting ducks for bandits. The Templars offered protection, sure, but their real genius was in how they protected the pilgrims' wealth.
What you're looking at here is basically the invention of the check, the world's first bank transfer. This was absolutely revolutionary. Instead of dragging heavy, dangerous gold across an entire continent, your wealth suddenly became weightless. It was just an idea, a promise, encrypted on a little piece of paper.
And this was their secret weapon. This was the real magic. The currency the Templars were actually dealing in wasn't gold or silver, it was trust. The absolute, unshakable belief that a piece of paper from the Templars was as good as gold, anywhere in the known world. They were the first to figure out how to monetize trust on a global scale.
Okay, so they have a killer idea, but a great idea isn't enough to build an empire, right? To become truly untouchable, the Templars built one of the most perfect institutional designs the world has ever seen. It was a machine engineered for power and survival.
Just look at this ecosystem. The Templars weren't just a bank, or just an army, or just a religious order. They were a hybrid of all three, and each part fed the others. Their elite knights protected their network of banks and castles. The financial profits from those banks funded the army, and their special blessing from the Pope meant they answered to no king and paid no taxes. It was a perfect, self-reinforcing loop.
I mean, think about how unbeatable this setup was. You've got this multinational corporation that operates beyond the laws of any single country. It has its own army. It's tax-exempt. And because the knights took vows of poverty and celibacy, you never have to worry about the company's wealth being broken up by inheritance. All the profits, all the land, all the power, it just stayed inside the order, compounding for centuries.
But there's a downside to being that powerful and that rich. You don't just have clients, you have debtors. And sometimes your biggest debtor can become your most dangerous enemy.
So, let's meet King Philip the Fair of France. This guy was ambitious, he was ruthless, and after a bunch of costly wars, he was completely broke. And guess who his biggest creditor was? The very institution he owed a massive fortune to, the Knights Templar. So Philip had a choice. He could spend the rest of his reign trying to pay back an impossible debt, or he could just get rid of the creditor.
And this is the exact moment our story about high finance turns into a brutal thriller. Philip's logic was terrifyingly simple. He realized it would actually be easier to conspire with the Pope and destroy an entire global institution than to just pay his bills.
And so he did it, on a date that has been infamous ever since, Friday the 13th.
At dawn, in a perfectly coordinated, lightning-fast strike all across France, the king's men arrested every single Templar they could find. In just a few hours, the most powerful organization in Europe was effectively decapitated.
Now, the official story, the one they sold to the public, was wild. Heresy, blasphemy, devil worship. But make no mistake, this was the largest, most sophisticated heist in medieval history. The accusations were just a smokescreen for Philip to raid the Templar treasury, burn the accounting books, and cancel his nation's debt in a blaze of fire and blood.
So, the order was crushed. The Grand Master was burned at the stake. But here's the crazy part. The Templar story doesn't really end there, because the patterns of their rise and their spectacular fall are echoed so clearly, so perfectly in our own time, it's actually unnerving. The fall of the Templars was basically the 14th century version of a too-big-to-fail event. They were so woven into the fabric of the European economy that when they suddenly vanished, it triggered a financial crisis. Sound familiar? Think about the absolute chaos after Lehman Brothers collapsed in 2008. It just goes to show that the risk of one single entity becoming dangerously powerful is a truly timeless problem. And the parallels, they don't stop there. Think about what the Templars were doing with those paper notes. They created a system of value that existed outside the direct control of any one king. It was a competing financial network. Well, today, cryptocurrency is trying to do the exact same thing. Create a system that governments and central banks can't control. And the reaction from the state? It's the same as King Philip's. Regulate it, control it, and if you have to, crush it. So what's the big takeaway here? After all this, what does a 700-year-old story about warrior monks really have to teach us today? Well, it's that the technology changes, the names change, but the game of power, that stays the same.
This is the key. The Templar story is about this constant tug-of-war between innovators who create new forms of value based on trust and the established powers that want to control that value. Because if you control the system of trust, you control the money. And, like we said at the beginning, whoever controls the money controls the world.
And that's why this story hits so hard. It isn't just some quaint tale from a dusty old book. It's a mirror. And when we look into it, we don't just see knights in armor. We see our own financial systems, our own governments, and our own timeless battle between innovation and control.
The tools have evolved from coded parchment to blockchain ledgers, but the fundamental conflict is playing out all around us right now. The story of the Templars forces us to ask ourselves, in this ongoing game of money, trust, and power, where do you stand?